So thank you so much, all of you, for coming. We're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to give a little bit of introduction tonight about our program, even before I introduce our magnificent guest speaker, Dr. Adrian Sargeant, this evening. So I am Cindy Lott, and I am the Academic Program Director of the new Nonprofit Management Program here at the School of Professional Studies at Columbia University. I want to thank you all for coming, both for the networking reception and also for tonight's program. This evening, we have the pleasure and the honor of having Dr. Adrian Sargeant. I actually met Adrian at Indiana University when he was there. He is now elsewhere, and so we didn't fly him in from overseas, but we happened to catch him while he was here in the States, which is awesome. So we feel really, really lucky to have him this evening. I am actually going to do something I normally don't do, which is I'm going to read a bit of a bio of him, because we did not make that full bio available in the invitation. We talked a little bit when Adrian and I met, and we've seen each other recently at a Federal Trade Commission conference where he also spoke, and a couple of other folks here in the audience were there for their first ever charities conference. I should mention that's my own field, is on regulatory policy in the charitable sector. And I was very, very, very grateful that Adrian showed up and spoke magnificently at that conference. So I already know he's a great speaker. But I haven't heard him speak on this yet, so this will be wonderful. I'm going to read this just so we're all on the same page about where he's coming from, and a new book, which I hope you will plug. Please do, as it comes up tonight, Adrian. So Adrian Sargeant is Professor of Fundraising and Director of the Hartsook Center for Sustainable Philanthropy at the University of Plymouth. Formerly the first Hartsook Chair in Fundraising at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. He holds visiting appointments in other universities, including Queensland University of Technology. He's received many awards for his services to the profession, notably being named to the prestigious Nonprofit Times Power and Influence list in the U.S. in 2010. In 2016, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Institute of Fundraising and a Civil Society Award for Outstanding Contribution to Fundraising. He is, of course, which is why he's here, one of the world's leading authorities on how to achieve growth in philanthropy, which is really what he has focused on and we spoke about as we were designing the topic for this evening. In 2011, he ran Growing Philanthropy Summits in DC and London, drawing together leaders from the nonprofit communities in both countries to discuss the role that the sector itself might play in growing philanthropy. He also helped facilitate a philanthropy summit for the Rockefeller Foundation and the Resource Alliance in Bellagio, Italy, the primary goal of which was to improve the flow of philanthropy in the development system. More recently, he's published work on how philanthropists conceptualize risk in philanthropy and jointly authorized a new report for the Resource Alliance on Tomorrow's Philanthropy. He is, of course, a prolific author, if you have looked him up, and educator. He's published many books and around 150 peer-reviewed academic publications, which, if you figure out that, I'm not sure how you did that at this age, but okay, that's amazing. Most recently, he's designed new qualification frameworks for fundraising professional bodies across the world. In the UK, for example, he designed the new certificate diploma and advanced diploma in fundraising courses that are now offered by the Institute of Fundraising. He's doing similar work in the US and Norway, and with the Association of Fundraising Professionals and the Norwegian Fundraising Association. We are so glad that he is here. We get to call him also one of our own. I know that he became a naturalized citizen in November 2013. So welcome and welcome home. We are very happy to have you, Adrian. And we will be doing Q&A at the end of his talk, which will run about an hour. And we really do hope for a good and robust conversation. So I'll be taking the mic up towards the end to help with the Q&A. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming this evening. So I've been given the task of talking a little bit about the psychology of philanthropy. And what I'm going to do is share with you some of the recent work that we've been doing in that space. If you're interested in keeping up with our work, the easiest way of doing it is the Twitter handle Regare FTT, Regare being Latin for Ask, FTT Fundraising Think Tank, or you can join some of the discussions that we have on the Critical Fundraising site on Facebook. Now, what I'm going to do this evening is to give you a flavour of the work we've been doing on relationship fundraising, but I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about why I think that's important. One of the reasons it's important is because donor retention and loyalty is a massive issue for the sector today, and probably the biggest issue that we face as a sector. Why is it important? Well, because even small improvements in donor retention and loyalty translate to massive improvements in the lifetime value of a fundraising database. And if you're able to improve the level of retention in the here and now by around 10%, you can increase the value of the fundraising database by 50%. Why? Because the effect compounds over time. So if you lose fewer donors this year, you've got more people giving next year. In turn, you're going to lose a smaller percentage of them, and so the effect builds. And for most organisations, that's not really the end of the story, though. Most non-profit organisations spend a lot of money to acquire new donors and bring people into the organisation for the first time. And it's not unusual for organisations to lose half of the money that they spend on new donor acquisition, because that's just simply how the economics work. So if you're not losing lots of people, you don't have to spend lots to replace all of the individuals you lost. And if you factor that into the calculation, my little improvement in loyalty in the here and now translates to 100% improvement in the lifetime value of a fundraising database. And even that isn't the end of the story, because if people hang around for longer on the database, they do sexy things. They upgrade the level of their gift. They give to the capital campaign, to the emergency appeal. They volunteer. And maybe if we can keep them around for long enough, they might even think about leaving us a bequest at the end of their lifetime. Well, some of those things are a little difficult to put a dollar value on, but if you try, my little improvement in loyalty translates to a whopping 150 to 200% improvement in lifetime value. This is why Adrian says retention's an issue. So if it's an issue, how well do we do with that issue right now? Is there a big opportunity to be able to improve on our current pattern of performance? Well, I was deeply ashamed by the graph that I'm about to show you, because this is based on UK data. And it transpires that the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 4.2. And that, we know, is the average donor lifetime right now is about 4.2 years. This is based, incidentally, on an analysis of some 8 million donor records from different organisations. And the reason I'm ashamed with this data is because it tells me that over the first year, we lose half of the donors that we recruit. Half of the people we bring into our organisation will either not make a second gift or will cancel their monthly gift in the first year. And then you see the attrition thereafter. And like I said, I was kind of embarrassed by that. I'm not anymore, because I've moved to the United States. And actually, that's a very good pattern of performance, because here in the States it's far worse. And data from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project tells us we lose 70% of the people we bring into our organisations never come back and make another gift. It's almost like the new fundraising skill set is the ability to deliberately find people who will never give again, right? That's what we're good at as a profession. So that's pretty glum, and there's more bad news on the way. Because what you're looking at here is the attrition curve based on when donors were recruited. So back in 2002, that blue line that you can see there was the lifetime attrition. In 2010, donors are recruited in that year. Look at how that's dipped just in the last 4-year period. This is based on UK data, but it's going to be quite similar here in the US, we think. We're just starting to do some analysis on files here as well. People are not as loyal to organisations as they once were. Interesting that from this data we know that loyalty does vary a bit depending on the channels that you use to bring people into the organisation for the first time. I've just put a selection of 5 different organisations here, and the dotted line is the kind of average. So you can see that people who come in from direct response television tend to be more loyal for some reason than people that come in from other channels. And I'll tell you why I think that is in just a minute. People who are recruited through direct dialogue, face-to-face, pretty much on the average. And then what this tells me, that there's a massive difference there in what people are able to achieve online between organisations. So retention's an issue, and it seems like it varies quite a lot by channel. What's interesting for me is it also varies a lot by charity. And I just picked 4 out from our database here to give you a sense of how much variation there is. That's down to strategy. These are not different organisations in the sense of the cause they serve. They're just different in terms of the pattern of performance they've been able to achieve. So, can we do better than that? Can we envisage a world where we might be able to retain more than 30% of our donors in the first year? Well, to answer that question, we decided we'd take a little bit of time out to see what we might be able to learn about how people form relationships. And so we spent a bit of time about a year ago now looking at the social psychology space, looking at the science of how human beings form relationships to see if there's in any way some stuff we might be able to learn there that would help inform what we do in terms of fundraising. And in that space, they tell us that relationships go through a number of different stages. There's an awareness where you're kind of broadly aware that there's somebody you might want to have a relationship with, and if that feeling's mutual, maybe you'll start to explore the potential for that relationship, allow it to develop over time, and ultimately maybe you might make a commitment to that individual. And there's a science between what's going on at each of those stages. So is there anything in that that might be helpful to us as fundraisers? Well, one of the first things to realize is that not all fundraising needs to be about relationships. Some of it could be, but it's a choice. In some instances, it might be enough just to provide people with a decent quality of service. All right, if you're running a community event, you'll get people come to that event because they care about what you do, but you'll also get people come to that event who are coming because they're interested in the event, right? So, they're not looking for a relationship from the organization, and perhaps what we should be doing is just give them a decent quality experience. So we have to make a choice about whether we're going to invest in relationship fundraising. And the choice is between handling an engagement with the donor as a transaction or handling it as a relationship. I talk a lot to fundraisers, and most fundraisers want to tell you, yeah, we do relationship fundraising. That's what we're all about as an organization. We care passionately about our donors. We want to build relationships. All right. Tell me about your metrics then. Right? What are you assessed on? What do people care about in your organization? Dollars. Number of new donors. Return on investment, average gift size. Don't kid me, you're into relationships, right? If you're into relationships, you'll have relationship metrics. For a start, it won't be about the immediate return on investment you get from everything. It'll be on lifetime value, right? You'll be taking decisions on that basis. And maybe, just maybe, sometime before I retire, there'll be at least one fundraiser in the United States who's rewarded in part for how good they make their donors feel. Right? This is not, incidentally, rocket science, right? Because in the commercial world, this is routinely now how marketing managers are rewarded. They're rewarded for the level of satisfaction, commitment, trust, all of those good things that they're able to engineer with their customer base. In our world, we don't care about relationships because we don't use relationship metrics. Right? We've got a long way, it seems, to go to get that. If you are into relationship fundraising, then the focus is on the longer term. It's on the relationship. The metrics are going to be relationship-oriented. And the whole focus of your activity, really, is not so much about dollars as the quality of relationships. So we have to think about which one of those two routes we're going to take. And there's nothing wrong with a transactional approach, giving people a decent quality of service. But if you're going to do a relationship approach, then there are other things that you have to think about to make that happen. One of the things you have to think about is donor needs. As the profession of fundraising, I think we've been reasonably good over the last 30 years at finding ways to identify need, taking elements of that need, crafting it into a decent case for support, and putting it in front of individuals who might be interested in giving to help bring about that social change. Fundraisers, that's the skill set, I think, right now. What we've not been so good at is thinking about how we make people feel when we do that. And I wish, as a profession, if we were genuinely interested in relationship fundraising, we'd spend as much time thinking about how we make people feel as how we're going to package need and who we're going to put it in front of. Right? Because that's really the key to beginning to develop the notion of relationship fundraising. So, let's have a look at some of the learning from social psych. The first little bit of learning is that if you want to successfully get to the point where you might be able to start a relationship with somebody, you've got to evoke a little bit of emotion, right? There needs to be a little bit of spark there to get that relationship off the ground. And the same is true in fundraising. Neuroscience tells us that if you talk to people logically, they draw conclusions, right? If you make people feel something, you can get them to change a behavior. Well, as fundraisers, we don't want conclusions. We want people to give us money, right? So we've got to be thinking about how we're going to stimulate a bit of emotion. Now, I thought, being here in New York, I couldn't possibly offend anybody by showing a Dutch example, right? Because there's nothing worse than putting up something on the screen and somebody says, I wrote that, you know. Well, I can be rude about this, right? And I can be rude about it because it's actually quite similar to the kind of stuff that a lot of American nonprofits generate, right? 3 paragraphs of boring text, and then in desperation, a picture of the chief executive that you're hoping somehow is going to swing it for you. And look at this guy. You know, he's wearing a decent suit. He doesn't need the money anyway. So this is bad fundraising. It's not going to make people feel something, which is what you want to do if you want to get people to give, certainly to the organisation for the first time. Compare that with the British Kidney Research organisation. And straight away, you know, you're kind of teased in here to the envelope and the message. If you're a parent, you'll know what those things are, right? You've probably got them stashed in the drawer at home, right? Because little baby, when baby was born, was late, you know, was tagged up in the hospital so that it wasn't confused with somebody else's baby. You get home and you keep it as a souvenir. So you're kind of intrigued, well, why? Is there a Y on the envelope? And then you read the why is actually, why did both my baby boys have to die? And then you read the story of, the heartbreaking story really, of a family who've lost not 1 but 2 children to kidney disease. And you read about the fact that mom, when mom is pregnant with child number 2, is told that this child too has a terminal illness. And within a few minutes of being born, baby's going to slip away. Well, again, if you're a parent, you'll remember one of the memories that will be etched on your brain is the first time you held your child in your arms, right? It's just one of those things as a parent that you're never going to forget. And you're reading about this poor woman who's going to be able to hold her baby for no more than a few minutes before it drifts away. You can't help. I've told this story so many times, but every time I talk about it, I can feel my throat, you know, like a lump coming up there. Because there's emotion in there. And that's what you need if you're going to raise money from people. You have to make people feel something. Similar communication from the same organisation. And the envelope this time says, inside you'll find the most extraordinary letter you'll ever read. And of course, you know, you get teased into that. Then you've got to, I've got to find out what that is. If it's the most extraordinary letter I've ever read, I'm interested to get in and see what that is. And actually what it is a letter to little Katie there, bless her, from her kidney. And it says, Dear Katie, I'm so sorry I let you down. I wanted to be a strong, healthy kidney so that I could clean your blood of toxins and keep you safe. But instead, here I am, I've covered in ugly cysts and I'm useless. Katie, I want to, you know, and again, by this point, you're starting to get that lump in your throat, right? And you're going to do something to help Katie as a consequence. So emotion is absolutely key in fundraising. We need to make people feel something if they're going to give. And don't go away thinking, oh, well, you know, it's easy to do this through direct mail, that we can't do that in other channels. Yeah, you can. Here's a digital example. It's from Plan UK, do a lot of work in the developing world. Remember your first period? Leaving school, getting married, having your first child? Well, Anini does, and she's 12. And at that point you go, oh, the horror of that. And again, I've made you feel something at that point, so you're going to think about giving to support the work of the organisation. What else? Well, in this early stage of a relationship, there needs to be a little bit of kind of, you know, give and take taking place. And so maybe what we might do is to begin to give donors a little bit of choice over what they're going to receive from the organisation. Now, when I first started teaching relationship fundraising a long time ago now, I'd be saying, all right, so let's begin to creep a little bit of choice in where we can. Now I'm thinking, well, it's smarter, I think, to wait a little bit. Because if you sign me up as a donor today and you ask me whether I want a newsletter, I'm probably going to say no because it sounds boring, right? Newsletters are dull, right? Well, if I've been receiving the newsletter for a few months, I'm reading the stories you're telling me, I'm being thanked in a smart way in that communication, I begin to realize actually they're not boring. Actually, I really quite enjoy this. I like to look through the articles and I get a value from it. So it's smarter perhaps to wait a few months until people have been exposed to the program of communication, and then if you are going to offer them a little bit of choice, to creep that into the program at that point, because they'll be able to take more informed decisions over what they want or what they don't want from the organization. The other thing I'd be doing is gathering a little bit of information about the people who are giving to the organization. If you're working in a non-profit that has maybe 4 or 5 different strands to what it does, different programs that you're providing, why not ask people at the point of acquisition or sometime soon thereafter which bits of what you do really matter to them, what really gets them fired up. You might even ask them a little bit about, why that's of interest. So that if you do nothing else in the future, you can make sure that you talk to people about the things that they're most interested in when you're trying to get them to give to support the work of the organization. Interesting that if you're doing that in a survey, we know from social psych that if you're asking people about their opinions on something like that, you have to close the loop by making it clear that you listened to them. Right, so you have to provide some feedback if you're going to be in that process of developing a relationship. Later on in a relationship, you can ask people to share things that are a bit more personal. You don't want to do it too early on in the relationship, but later you can get them to share their stories, get them to talk to you about what the mission of the organization means for them. And when people are sharing that much deeper level of thought and feeling, the goal in communications then is to close the loop by demonstrating they're cared for. Right? That's not the same as listened to, cared for. Very few non-profit organizations do that. Lots of non-profits now get people to share their stories, and they do that, but they don't close the loop. If you want to build a relationship, you have to close that loop. What else? Well, if we're going to go and develop a relationship, we need to know that the things that drive donor loyalty are satisfaction with the quality of service provided by the fundraising team, commitment to the mission of the organization, and trust in the organization. That's why I said these are relationship metrics that they've been measuring for a while now in the commercial world. We need to do the same thing in the non-profit sector. People who are very satisfied with the quality of service provided by the fundraising team, twice as likely to be giving to you next year as people who say they're just satisfied. These 3 factors combined explain about 54% of the variation in giving behavior. This is why Adrian says these are metrics that not only do we need to be measuring, we should be rewarding our fundraisers for their ability to achieve improvements in that. Now, I told you earlier that we lose 70% of the donors between our first and second gift. This is how American donors view American fundraising. Thankfully, nobody hates us. This is very dissatisfied, no opinion, satisfied, very satisfied, right? The good news is nobody hates us. Yeah, but this is a survey of donors, right? If they really hated us, they probably wouldn't be our donors. So there's no grounds for celebration there. You've got a big chunk of people who think, oh, yeah, well, not sure about that. 35%, yeah, it's all right. Only about 8% of people think fundraising in this country really rocks and we need more of it, right? So this is one of the reasons why we have terrible levels of attrition. These folks twice as likely to be giving to you next year than the folks who say we're just satisfied. So we need a bit of a shake-up in our metrics. Now, going back to social psychology, I think there's another element to satisfaction that we could be exploring. And we're beginning to do testing work now with clients to begin to build some of this into communications. Because it turns out, actually, what people find satisfying varies a little bit depending on where you are in the relationship. There's no doubt that early on, it's all about the work the organization's doing and, do I feel like, being treated reasonably well and is the work important to me and so on. As the relationship develops, the focus shifts to, so what does that mean for me? What does the work mean for me? My support of the organization mean for me? And what we're starting to talk about there is something called higher order human needs. And when I talk about human needs, I mean, if you're human, nobody's exempt, you're all going to have them, right? And the higher order human needs that you see there, psychologists are beginning to lay out in a bit more detail. Years ago, good old Abraham Maslow talked about the notion of self-actualization. Well, psychologists have honed that a bit in the intervening 60-odd years to come up with a better list. It turns out we are wired to look for connectedness with others that we care about. And we feel good about ourselves if we experience that level of connection with others that we genuinely care about. We also feel good about ourselves when we feel we're good at doing something, when we're competent. And the domain of philanthropy, what we're really talking about there, is competence in the articulation of love for others. That's the competence that we're talking about here. Equally, we feel good when we feel like it's some of our choices have contributed to that success. So I've been successful as a donor in bringing about a bit of change, but not just because I've been told by the organization I have to do that, but because I've exerted a little bit of choice along the way and had a little bit of autonomy in that process. I'm not going to talk about all of those, but you get the idea. Now, it turns out that as human beings, we're very good at knowing when our lower order needs are met. We know when we're hungry, we know when we're thirsty, we know when we're cold. We're not so good at knowing when our need for connectedness is met, when we've reached the optimal level of autonomy, or when we've reached an appropriate level of competence. It's hard for us to make those judgments. So in fundraising communication, we can be trying to steward these higher order needs and get people to feel more connectedness, feel more autonomous, feel better at articulating their love for others. But that's not enough, right? Not only have we got to do that, we've also got to then help people to take decisions about how good they are on those dimensions. That's a very different form of fundraising from the one we've been practicing to date, right? By using our communications to add value for donors in those kinds of ways, that's how we can begin to develop relationships. So I'm going to focus just on this notion of competence and connectedness. This, I think, is a fantastic example of it. The Royal British Legion is the charity that we have in the UK to take care of people that have been lost in a time of conflict. Our ex-servicemen and women, their families, people who've been hurt by conflict. And in the UK, in November, you won't find many people not wearing a little poppy in their lapel, because the poppy is the symbol of remembrance. This is an appeal from the Royal British Legion, and you know it's an appeal because there's a response mechanism there, and it's telling you about the work that's taking place. But what's really cute here is that on the back of the poppy you can see there, you can fill out a message of love to somebody that you've lost in a time of conflict. And the idea is you send that in. You don't have to send a donation in, but you can send that in if you want to. What happens to them when you send them in? Well, that varies a little bit year on year. This is the Menem Gate in Belgium, which was the scene of some pretty ghastly slaughter in the First World War 100 years ago. And they've planted your poppies there. Well, you imagine, your poppy that you sent in for your loved one could be that one there, or that one there. You know that your poppy's somewhere within that mix, along with lots of other messages of love that people have contributed. What are you feeling at that point? You're feeling a strong sense of connection. Not so much with the organization, but with the person that you've lost and others who've been through that experience, right? It's a strong bond that's being created there. And incidentally, you can probably just about make out some of the writing on here. Let me tell you, the handwriting here is really shaky. right? You know that for some of these folks that have sent in these messages of love, it may well be the last time that they're going to be able to remember somebody that they've lost. These are beautiful messages, and it's stunning fundraising because it plays to the higher order needs that individuals have. They've thought about very deliberately how they want to make people feel when they communicate. Here's another example. This is two versions of a newsletter, a before and an after, before a chum of mine, Tom Ahern, great North American copywriter, got hold of it. And he's working here with Gillette Children's Hospital. And on the left-hand side, you're seeing the original newsletter, which is, "At Gillette, medical pioneers set the standards for spine care." And it drones on at some length about how great the surgeons are, how fantastic the facilities are, and how great the nursing team are. Will you give us $20? Probably not. Then you look at the other version of it, and this is a little thank you note from a Tanzanian girl by the name of Zawadi. And what she's doing is saying a big thank you to you for making her operation possible. Because little Zawadi, and you can just about see down here, was born with both feet pointing in the wrong direction. That little girl could barely stand, much less walk. And she's thanking you for making her operation possible. How good are you feeling at this point? And it gets better as you get into it because you can see that she's holding bags here. What's going on there? Somebody has taken this little girl shoe shopping for the first time, right? And I can tell you, I have a 6-year-old at home. Shoes are important to her, right? That's why the little girl's smiling, you know, and you realize that you put the smile on her face. How fantastic is she feeling today? And you did it. I talked about competence in the articulation of love for others, right? You've chosen to give to help that little girl. How good are you feeling at that point? Excellent fundraising. And by the way, at Gillette, medical pioneers set the standards for spine care. Well, that raised an amazing $4,500. All right, newsletters are soft asks. We don't expect to raise lots of money because actually it's more about feeding back to donors and making them feel good. But little Zawadi's thank you, $49,600. Do the maths on that. That's about 1,000% increase, right? When Adrian talks about these things, these are not small effect sizes. They make a massive difference to our ability to fundraise. And not only our ability to fundraise, but our ability to make people feel good, right? If we were in the business of making people feel good, that's the kind of communication we'd be sending out. What else? Well, there's a theory in social psych called self-verification theory. And it turns out that we're kind of drawn to others who see us as we see ourselves. So when you're choosing a life partner, you're kind of looking for somebody who reflects back to you that sense of, yeah, I'm that kind of person. Yeah, that's right. I'm good like that. Right? Now, here's a communication from Practical Action. What do? They take practical action for people with disabilities in the developing world. And it's written to a colleague of mine. Thank you so much for your support. I'm wondering if you can maybe help us a different way today. We're planning to undertake some research with a small number of our supporters, and we'd really like to hear your views. We'd like to know a little bit more about the people who support us, what they know and think about our work, so that we can grow and expand our work overseas. We need to find the most effective ways of reaching people like you, and by understanding you, then we can go out and find others who might also be interested in supporting the work. So at this point, I'm feeling, yeah, they're telling me what a great person I am, and they want to go out and find other great people like me. So I'm feeling kind of good at this point. And it goes on. Doesn't matter whether you feel you know a lot about us or whether you've just started giving, your input will be really valuable. Okay, so I'm feeling good again. The research will take the form of a short telephone interview, which we hope you'll take part in. If you're happy to take part, you need to do nothing. You'll be contacted by JRA Research. So I'm feeling great at this point because I've been selected. They're interested in me. They're telling me I'm a great person. They want to find other people like me. And then it goes on. However, it's possible that you may not be contacted. And if you haven't heard from us by the end of October, please assume we've completed our research. They could easily have said, if you haven't heard from us by the end of October, follow this link. Go online. We'd love to hear from you. They've got hung up on the data. They've forgotten that they could have used that interaction to add a real bit of value for the supporters on the database. And you know, they've missed a whopping opportunity, it seems to me, as a consequence of that. Now, I said we're drawn to other people who see us like we want to be seen. It also turns out that we're drawn to people who are kind of attitudinally kind of similar to us, right? We find attraction in similarity. Similarity in terms of values, similarity in terms of interest, those sorts of things. Well, if that's the case, and you're a non-profit organization that has values, maybe we could give people the opportunity to see those values in our organization. Now, again, social psych tells us it's not enough to simply produce your values and post them on the website, or produce your values or stuff them into the annual report and somehow hope that that will magically bring the money rolling in. Life's not like that. What you need to do is to create experiences where people can experience for themselves the values of the organization. They can feel how value-oriented you are, and they can feel for themselves what the notion, the nature of those values might be. So you have to create those little immersive experiences that give people a flavor of that, really. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of time out here to go on a little diversion for a few minutes, because I want to explore in more detail this notion of similar people. It turns out that as human beings, we are wired to pay a lot of attention to what other people like us are doing, what other people like us are thinking, how other people like us are behaving. And if we understand that, well, then maybe we can think about how we might use that knowledge for fundraising. And here's a cautionary tale of how you don't use that kind of thinking in fundraising. This is apparently a true story. Somebody from Seattle Lakeside's upper school rang up Bill Gates, who's one of their alum, and asked him if he would give to the campaign, at which point he says, "How much is everybody else giving?" He's told $75 and says, "That's fine, sign me up for that." That's how not to use information about similar people in fundraising. Can we do better than that? Well, yeah, we can do better than that. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of research that we did in the domain of public broadcasting here in the States. And you will know that public radio is kind of an oasis of calm on the airwaves here. You know, you can tune in, you listen to some decent music, classical music, jazz, whatever, and there's decent quality discussion taking place, maybe good quality news, that kind of thing. And people, unsurprisingly, in communities right around the States, value that and give to support that work. And public radio gets about 1/3 of its funding from individual donations from people like you and me. Well, one of the things that they do to raise money is they have an on-air appeal, and don't we love those? You know, you tune in, you're expecting to hear the strains of your favorite music, and instead what do you get? "And this hour, our total is $50,000, call now and make your pledge." And you're hoping that people are going to do it, right? Because then you can get back to listening to your favorite jazz again, instead of listening to the fundraising. Well, we got to play with the telephone scripts that people would be exposed to when they would call in to make a gift to support their public radio station. And we gave them some information about what somebody else like them had just done. And when I say somebody else like them, I'm talking about somebody else like them who is a donor. So it's a very simple thing that's being shared here. How do you set that up in terms of a telephone script? Well, you'd say, "Hello, this is the XYZ member line. Are you a new or renewing member?" And then, if it's an experiment, you always have to have what's called a control group. And a control group is the group where you don't play with anything, right? You just leave it alone. And so in the control group, you go straight from, "Are you a new or renewing member? How much would you like to contribute? Take the credit card information. Thank you, good night." That's it. In our experimental condition, though, we gave people a little bit of information about what somebody else who shares that donor identity with them has just done. "Hello, this is XYZ member line. Are you a new or renewing member? We had another member who contributed $75. How much would you like to give today? We had another member who contributed $180. How much would you like to contribute today? We had another donor who contributed $300. How much would you like to give today?" And of course, it's all randomized as these calls come in. Incidentally, I know ethics is taught here at Columbia. You can't just make those numbers up, right? If you're going to say somebody's given $300, they actually have to have given $300, right? So you have to pick numbers that are appropriate, and you're not giving away the names of those individuals, so you're preserving the anonymity. It's just another donor. Now, what do we see? Well, for new donors, the average gift is around $87 for this station, very similar at the $75 condition. In the $180 condition, that average gift size has climbed to 97, and in the $300 condition, it's climbed to 112. Well, I've just shown you a way you can increase giving to your organization by over 10% simply by playing with a few words in that solicitation. Now, you could say, well, you know, these folks are new members. They frankly have no idea what they should be doing to give money to a non-profit organization. They have no idea of the amount. So maybe we're seeing an effect because we've given them an anchor, a number to think about when they're deciding how much they're going to give. And maybe if you start looking at people who have a history of giving, you won't see that effect anymore, right? Because they already know what is an appropriate amount for them to be giving to support the work of their public radio station. And of course, because we asked the question, we can test for that. So this is renewing members. And what you're looking at this time is the amount they're giving above what they gave last year. And surprise, surprise, people who, in the control condition, are giving pretty much at what they gave last year. So if they gave $100 last year, they're going to give $100 this year. In the $75 condition, not much change, but in the $180 condition, you're getting $20 more. In the $300 condition, you're getting $26 more. Slice and dice that a little differently, and what you're looking at, again, is a 10% increase in giving simply by playing with a few words in that telephone solicitation. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that's great. You managed to push up the amount of the gift this year, but maybe what's going to happen next year is that people are going to give you a bit less because they remember they gave you a bit more and they'll give you a bit less. So they kind of compensate. Well, we've been at this a long time now and we can track subsequent giving behavior. And actually what you see in year 2 isn't that. What you see in year 2 is anything between 30 and 45% higher revenue. Ooh. So what's happening there then? Does that mean that people are thinking, oh, that's right, I spoke to a volunteer last year and they told me about some other person who'd given a bit of money and then I thought, well, I'll give them a bit more myself. And then so maybe this year I'll give them a bit extra. Well, I don't know about you, but I can't remember what I said on the phone 5 minutes ago, let alone like a year ago. It's ridiculous, right? It's not that. What's happening is because you gave more last year, when the station's development program is kicking in, they're asking you to give at a higher level based on last year's giving. So what this tells me actually is that sharing information about other people like them is sustainable, right? When you achieve the uplift, it can continue year on year thereafter, simply again by playing with those few words in the communication. Now, pauses for effect here. Public radio at the year that we were doing this study was about a $250 million industry in terms of individual gifts. I've just shown you a way you can increase giving to that industry by 10%. That's an additional 25 million, right? Simply by playing with a few words in that telephone script. Now, experiments cost a bit of money to set up, but it's still not a bad overall return on investment. And I wish maybe, we do more testing in this sector. Now, some of you might be sat there thinking, well, that's great. I see how that works with telephone, but we don't do any telephone. Well, you can use it in other channels. So if you're going to use it in direct mail, you'd say we had another member, Mary, contributed $300 last year. Why don't you join Mary and make your pledge today? What do you see? You'll see a 10% increase again, broadly, in the amounts that people give as a consequence of that. And it works in digital channels as well. It's not channel specific. Well, you may have been thinking, well, he's shown us the $75, he's shown us the $180, he's shown us the $300, average gift keeps climbing. Why don't we tell people about somebody else who's given $500, $750, $10,000, and maybe the average gift size is just going to keep going up? Yeah, right. No. You would expect that there would be a boundary effect there. And actually what you find in this station, classical music station, average gift size of $121. If you tell them about somebody else who's given $600, the average gift climbs to $172. Tell them about somebody who's given $1,000 and it drops back to $140. What's going on there? Well, if you talk to me about somebody else who's given $600, I can see how that could be somebody like me. And as a consequence, because it feels like somebody like me, I allow it to impact on my behavior. Start talking to me, though, about somebody who's given $1,000. Well, that's somebody like Cindy, right? That's a wealthy person. We're not going to... I pay less attention to it because it's not somebody like me. So there's a boundary effect. Now, before you all dash back to your offices tomorrow morning and think, right, we're going to write to people and tell them about somebody else who's given $600, life isn't so neat, right? It turns out there's a way of calculating the optimal amount to tell somebody that somebody else has just given. And what you do is you line up all of your gifts from your very tiniest gift right the way up to your highest gift for that campaign or your previous campaign, and you pick an amount somewhere in the 90 to the 95th percentile. That's the amount that will give you the highest return on investment. Now, thinking back to Bill Gates, that's still a bit of a problem, right? Because if we pick a number in the 90 to the 95th percentile for Bill, we're going to give him a number that's still really inappropriate for somebody who could give a much higher magnitude. So what we could do is to segment our donors into groups. So it's not the 90 to the 95th percentile for all our giving, it's the 90 to the 95th percentile for that segment, the 90 to the 95th percentile for that segment, the 90 to the 95th percentile for that segment. Then we're beginning to get a bit closer. But even then, in Bill's case, we've still got a problem, because if we told him the 90 to the 95th percentile for all our major donors, we're still going to be somehow underplaying, what Bill should be giving. So here's the tip, right? The next time you're on the phone to Bill and he's saying, well, how much is everybody else giving? You're going to give him some social information, but it's going to be, well, do you know, Bill, they're giving about 2% of their income. Ah, right, that's the, yeah. Now, when this work was being done at Indiana University, it was coming out of a PhD thesis by Jen Shang. Jen's telling me, this is great, Adrian. I've shown how providing people with information about somebody else like them can punch up the level of giving by that individual. And I'm a pretty die-hard direct marketer. I've been around for many years. And I remember that back in the day, if you were sending out a solicitation or an appeal letter, and you had dollar handles in the response mechanism, so give $50, $75, $100 or whatever, that if you had 5 boxes, you'd pick the amount for that middle box at 1.5 times the level of the average gift for that segment, and you'd fan it out. Well, 1.5 times the level of the average gift is not far away from the 90 to the 95th percentile. So Jen's saying, that's all about social information. I'm saying, no, it's not, it's an anchor. You've given people a number and they're hanging their giving on the number. And she says, no, it's social information. Anyway, get into an argument. She proves me wrong. She proved me wrong by changing the telephone script. Instead of we had another donor who gave, it became we had another donor he gave, or another donor she gave. And where you match the gender of the caller with the gender of the exemplar, you punch up the level of giving by over 30%. Now, if it had been an anchor, you'd see the same 10% effect size, right? It's not. She's embellished that social information. She's told us more about that other focal individual, and it's punched up giving as a consequence. Now, can we do any better than that? Well, to do better than that now, we have to move away from those field experiments with the telephone scripts into what psychologists call the lab. And when psychologists talk about the lab, they're saying, we're going to move to a scenario where we're getting students to fill out some questionnaires for us, complete a couple of tasks. They have no idea which professors it's for, they don't know what the purpose of it is, but they're paid $15 an hour, a decent amount of money to sit down and fill these things out. Well, we got them to fill out a questionnaire for us, and at the end of the hour we gave them the opportunity to donate some of their money back into the department to fund future experiments, gave them social information and so on. It turns out that something called gender identity esteem matters. In plain English, if I feel really great about being a girl today, I pay a lot more attention to what other girls like me are giving. If I feel really fantastic about being a guy today, I pay more attention to what other guys like me are doing. It also turns out that self-other focus matters. So if you talk to me about me and how I'm feeling and what I'm doing today, I pay less attention to what others are doing. By contrast, talk to me about what others are doing, others' needs, others' interests. I pay more attention to what others like me are doing. So actually, what you want to do when you go back to the office is you want to craft a letter which says, "Isn't it fantastic to be a girl?" And give people 10 reasons why they should feel really fantastic about being a girl today. And then in the response mechanism, you give them a bit of social information about what another girl like them has just given, picking an amount that's somewhere in the 90 to the 95th percentile for that group of donors. And that's how you'll maximize your campaign and probably lose your job. Right? Now, the reason why I took that detour is because I wanted to make the point, right? And actually the point is not about gender at all, because gender is one identity we have, and maybe for most of the organizations in this room isn't a relevant identity. If you're breakthrough breast cancer, maybe it would be a relevant identity. If you're running a shelter for battered women or something, you know, domestic violence, yeah, I can see how gender might be an issue in that space. But for most of the organizations in the room, it's not. So actually what you're going to do when you go back to the office is think about what are people saying about themselves when they give to our organization? What identity are they articulating? Could be a gender-based identity. It might be an identity as a conservative, as a liberal, as a patriot, as a cancer survivor, as a parent, as a passionate environmentalist. What is it that people are saying about themselves? And then you say, you give them 10 reasons why they should feel really fantastic about being that kind of person, right? And really massage how good it feels to be that kind of person, and then give them some information about what somebody else who shares that kind of identity is doing to support the work of the organization. I'll guarantee you 2 things happen at that point. Number 1, they will give you more. But number 2, they will feel really good about having supported the organization because you reinforced a key sense of their self, a key identity for that individual. And again, that comes back to that notion of higher order needs that we could be and should be addressing in fundraising. What else? Well, before I took this little detour, I was talking about self-verification theory. We're drawn to people who see us in the way that we feel we are. It turns out, though, that given a choice between a partner who sees us in the way we see ourselves and a partner who sees us as this sort of fantastic person up there somewhere, we'll take that all the time, right? That'll be the one that wins. It won't be the person who sees us as, you know, the person we feel we are. It's the person who, you know, we would really love to be, and they see us already as that kind of person. Well, maybe we can use that knowledge in fundraising and create opportunities to allow donors to stretch their sense of how great a person they are today. It's hard to find examples of that because not many organizations are really doing that right now. But the kind of thing I had in mind is, you know, creating other ways that stretch that sense of good feeling. So maybe I can give you money, but maybe I could donate my birthday this year, so that my family and friends can get a sense of how passionate I am about a belief that we need to put an end to child cruelty or homelessness or whatever it might be. These kinds of things really, again, play to building up that strong sense of self. One other theory is something called identity fusion. And there's a lot of interest right now on the part of governments in identity fusion. There's a lot of interest in it because this is an attempt to explain how it is that seemingly quite rational human beings can cheerfully pull on a vest full of explosives and blow themselves up in the name of some cause. And understandably, a lot of governments these days are interested in how that process happens so that they can unpick it and stop it from happening in the first place. Well, it turns out that what's going on here is that the individual has lost that sense of boundary between themselves as an entity and the cause as an entity. And when there's a barrier there, if you start thinking about harming your lives or harming the lives of others, there are all kinds of negatives and you're not going to do it. But immediately that boundary starts to get eaten into and I begin to see myself in the cause, then the notion of blowing myself up becomes attractive, because even though it's a massive loss for my physical self, it's not a loss for that wider sense of self that I have at that point. So is there anything that we might learn from that as fundraisers? Well, one of the things I think we can learn from that is that we want to begin to break down the barriers between the organisation and the cause, and the organisation and the donor, so that the donor can begin to see a bigger chunk of who they are in the work that the organisation's doing. Not the organisation, the work that the organisation's doing. Let me give you a sense of what that looks like. This, again, is a before and after of a thank you letter this time. Different copywriter this time, Lissa Sargeant. No relation to me, but a great copywriter nonetheless. So on the left-hand side, it says, "Dear Adrian, thank you so much for your gift of $100 in support of the Ontario Science Centre. Do you know that science and technology enriches our lives, and a single visit to the Ontario Science Centre can plant a seed and provide the basis for a lifetime of exploration and boredom." Right? It's Della's dishwater. And worse, it's all about them and what they're doing and all the things that they're doing in their mission, right? That's not going to make people feel like they're in a relationship. Compare that with, "Dear Adrian, robots whir, comets streak, tide pools gurgle. When science comes to life, anything is possible, and all because of you." Ooh, how good are you feeling at that point? And you know, they've taken the organisation out of it and they've made you part of the work that's taking place. And fusion theory says that's smart. Here's another example. Same copywriter, different organisation. "Dear Adrian, on behalf of..." Oh, goodness. Do you hate it when organisations do it. It's like getting a letter from the Queen, really, frankly. "On behalf of..." "Thank you for sending through the gift. For over 100 years, this charity has been Ireland's leading independent charity advocating for the rights and well-being of children." Who cares what happened 100 years ago? The only people who care about what happened 100 years ago are the people that are still on your board somewhere who remember it. "Our mission is to end cruelty and injustice to children in all forms." Oh, goodness me. Now you compare that with, "Dear Adrian, somewhere in Ireland, a child is calling for help, and because of you, a caring voice answers." Ooh, yes, I feel good about myself. Okay, I'm getting towards the end, which for some of you will doubtless be a relief. I just wanted to talk just very briefly for a couple of minutes just about commitment. Remember, I'm working my way through these relationship stages. There's an interesting branch of research in social psych about how human beings develop commitment in relationships. And unsurprisingly, how satisfied we are with the history of that relationship drives how committed we feel kind of moving forward. Equally, that sense of commitment is a function of how much investment we've put into that in the past, and also, sadly, the availability of alternatives. Right? So we become quite committed to our life partner if there aren't lots of other people falling over themselves to have a relationship with us. Right? So that's how commitment plays out. It turns out, though, that there's some interesting stuff there in that notion of investment. The things that drive commitment are the past tangible investments you've made. So if you've got a mortgage with somebody, a loan with somebody, pets, you bought a car together, bought a house, all of those things build up commitment by dint of being involved in that tangible investment in the past. Equally, it turns out, though, that there are intangible investments. Over time, we've shared intimate thoughts with our relationship partner. We've shared bits about ourselves that maybe we don't want the rest of the world to know. And it's taken us a while to get to that point. It's taken us a little bit of effort to share in that way. Those investments count too when you're thinking about commitment. It turns out also, though, that we can think about investments we're going to make in the future. And if we prime people to think about, oh yeah, we're going to buy a car next year, yeah, we're going to go on holiday together next year, as they're rehearsing these investments they're going to make, the strength of the feeling of commitment they have grows. Equally, thinking about intangible investments in the future, how the relationship is going to make them feel, other disclosures they're going to make, that kind of thing also impacts on commitment. Now, what's fascinating is that this future stuff is more powerful than the past stuff. So in communications, getting people to think about and plan for and rehearse in their heads these is smarter in terms of building commitment. The most powerful one, though, is this: intangible investment in the future. So thinking about what the mission of the organization will mean to me over the next 5 years, how my support of the organization will make me feel over the next few years, what it might mean to my children, to my grandchildren. Getting people to reflect on these issues consciously, maybe through something you said in a newsletter or an appeal or whatever, is smart in terms of beginning to build up that aggregate level of commitment. So, this is my last slide. I've shared with you a whole whack of different ideas and theories from the domain of social psychology. They've come at you in rather a rapid-fire way, and there's a lot more actually in the reports. The good news is that the reports are all free to air, so you can download them. The first volume is all about anything we can learn from relationship marketing to inform fundraising. Volume 2 is what I've talked about tonight, what we can learn from social psychology to inform relationship fundraising. Volume 3 is about what practitioners say they're doing right now in terms of relationship fundraising. And the fourth is kind of an executive summary. All of that's available free to air through one of our sponsors' websites, Pursuant. You're very welcome to head in that general direction if you want any further information or advice. On that happy note, I will let you go on your way. Thank you, folks.